211 days without a single Starship launch, the longest break since the program began. This break ends now, on May 12th at 10:30 p.m. UTC. Here in Central Europe, it will already be May 13th, half past midnight. That was on the 1st. On May 1st, 2026, this was confirmed by an international aviation document, and SpaceX has not withdrawn the information since then. In this video, we present to you the real mission briefing for Flight 12. All the information about the new Starship Variant 3 really relates only to the 12th test flight. What happens in the last 10 days before launch? What are the final minutes like? Where and how will the rocket fly? And what will happen if everything works? My name is Siran, and this is Mars Chronicles. Before we get into the details, here's a quick update on the status of the formal approvals. Without those, there won't be a launch. The FCC license for Flight 12 was already issued in January 2026 and is valid until June 28, 2026. That fully covers the current launch window and all backup dates in the following days. The specific communications license for the actual flight day was extended later, and the FAA has the updated timing. In September 2025, the corresponding environmental determination was published, which covers the new trajectory options. In February 2026, the final cadence increase for Starbase was approved, allowing SpaceX to conduct the regular flights we expect for the coming months. What's still missing? The NOTAMs, meaning the Notice to Airmen, and the NOTMARS, the Notice to Mariners. Both are routinely issued 72 hours before launch. But before that, two important tests still need to be carried out. And at this point, I have to pause for a moment and correct something. In the script for the Starship V3 briefing last week, I said that the static fire of Booster 19 was on the 16th. On April 16th, it successfully fired for the full 15-second duration. Of course, that's not correct. That was poorly phrased and researched by me. When checking the data and the NSF reports, it's clear. Both tests were aborted early. The first static fire took place on the 16th. It took place in March. With 10 engines, it ended after exactly 2.135 seconds. The reason wasn't a problem with the rocket itself, but with the so-called apex combustors. These are small gas generators that are part of the water deluge system of Pad 2. Two of them reported an unexpected condition, which caused the system to trigger a pad abort. The consequence of this hard shutdown was costly though. About half of the 10 ignited Raptor 3 engines suffered mechanical damage. SpaceX removed all 10 and replaced them with ones from the stock that was actually intended for Booster 20. The second static fire on April 15 was then the attempt with all 33 engines. This test was also aborted early by the pad systems. This time after just 1.88 seconds. It was a sensor in the ramp manifold that reported a pressure lower than the system expected. Most likely a sensor error, but the system still responded correctly and shut down all 33 engines in a controlled manner. A real ignition with all 33 engines at full duration is still pending, and that's exactly the most important missing test before Flight 12. That's my mistake, and I want to address it openly here. Mars Chronicles has a clear obligation to you, the viewers. I try to check every fact before recording. But I'm not infallible. If I make a mistake, it's only right that I admit it and correct it. This episode does exactly that, and it's not the first time, nor will it be the last time, that I make mistakes. Anyone who believes they are infallible has stopped learning and can no longer be trusted. In any case, here's what that means for Flight 12. SpaceX will very likely have to perform a full 33-engine static fire for the full duration before the rocket is ready for launch. Possibly also a wet dress rehearsal, a full-scale rehearsal with complete fueling of the integrated stack, which is aborted just before engine ignition. Rumor has it that SpaceX might skip the wet dress rehearsal because they generally have data from the individual tests. But Bat-2 is new, Booster 19 is new, Ship 39 is new. Introducing three variables at once for a launch without a full dress rehearsal would be unusual for SpaceX. But they're always good for a surprise, so let's see what happens and keep an eye on the situation. Speaking of a correction. I also want to be more precise about Macy's metal structure. I described it as a squeeze test device, which was correct but not complete. The multifunctional structure, which has been at the ship test site at Macy's Outpost since spring 2026, does two things. First, it actually pulls sideways on the ship's flaps to simulate the loads that will act during the later re-entry. Second, it serves as a platform that provides direct access to the payload bay and other areas of the ship without the need for separate lifting equipment. So it's not specific to catch pins, which exist on the ship, but at the forward bulkhead, they are not tested by this structure. The tests are for the structural integrity of the flaps under load. If this preparation excites you as much as it does me, then hit the hype icon now if you have it. Just swipe the comment window to the left in the mobile version. If not, a like, subscription, or a short comment help the channel a lot. I will be live streaming on May 12th and 13th for anyone who wants to join. Subscribe and enable the notification bell. Thank you, and let's continue. Now let's get to the launch itself. What happens in the last few hours before the launch? Fueling begins about 50 minutes before the planned liftoff. The fueling of the ship starts at T-minus 45 minutes and 54 seconds. Booster loading follows shortly after in parallel. Both end at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. SpaceX can fuel the entire stack, booster and ship together with almost 5,000 tons of propellant in 43 minutes and 4 seconds. For Booster 19 alone, during the tests at Pad 2, it was only about 30 minutes. For context, that's more than the dry weight of the International Space Station pumped into the tanks in less than 3/4 of an hour. A Falcon 9 only starts fueling at T-minus 35 minutes, and it's a comparatively tiny rocket. The methane transfer pipe alone, which transports methane to the engines, is the size of a Falcon 9. What SpaceX has achieved here with Pad 2 is a fueling rate unlike anything in the history of spaceflight. These 5,000 tons are roughly distributed as follows. The booster holds around 3,400 tons of propellant and the ship around 1,600 tons. The mixture ratio for the methane-powered Raptor is about 3.6 to 1 in favor of liquid oxygen. That means about 4,000 tons are LOX, which is liquid oxygen at minus 183 degrees Celsius. The remaining 1,000 tons are liquid methane at around minus 162 degrees Celsius. In addition, there is nitrogen for pressurization and helium for controlling smaller systems. That's the cryogenic logistics. While these masses are flowing into the tanks, ground processing is happening at the same time. The water deluge system at Pad 2 is being activated. The detonation suppression is being ramped up. The telemetry connections are being checked. The last 4 minutes are the most critical. At T-minus 4 minutes, the final pressurization of the tanks is activated. At T-minus 3 minutes, the fueling process ends. At T-minus 40 seconds, the internal computer switches to automatic mode. From this moment on, the ground systems no longer actively communicate with the rocket. They only observe from then on. At T-minus 3 seconds, the first engines ignite. Within the last second, all 33 booster engines are running. When all 33 reach nominal chamber pressure, the clamps release and the stack lifts off. If even one of the engines doesn't start, the system can either launch with the remaining 32 or abort the launch depending on the configuration. In the past, we've already seen the stack lift off even with an engine failure. That's the advantage of having 33 engines and a high thrust-to-weight ratio. Even if several engines fail at launch, the mission wouldn't be in danger. However, the probability of a Raptor 3 engine failing is extremely low. Even Raptor 2 had a failure rate of around 1%. The flight path is new. That's one of the key changes for Flight 12. On the previous 11 flights, Starship flew south of Florida and passed between Cuba and the Bahamas, then over Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the Leeward Islands. This route went directly through the main Atlantic air traffic corridor. For Flight 12, the FAA has approved a new southern route. The stack still launches from Starbase in Texas, but flies through a narrower corridor between Jamaica and Cuba, then between St. Vincent and Grenada in the southern Caribbean islands. This route completely avoids the major air traffic routes over Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. The reason for this adjustment is transparent. If a vehicle similar to Ship 33 or Ship 34 were to break apart in an anomaly, the debris would land in open ocean waters instead of near populated areas or heavily trafficked air corridors.
SpaceX hat aus dem Karibik-Trümmervorfall vom Januar 2025 gelernt.
The FAA has approved the new route. And now to the most important question: what happens during the flight? For the first 2.5 minutes, all 33 engines of the booster are firing at around 70 kilometers altitude, and about Mach 5 hot staging takes place. The 30 engines of the 2 outer rings shut down. The 3 central Raptors keep running to stabilize the booster, while the engines of the upper stage ignite. The booster separates and the ship continues to accelerate under its own power. The booster then performs its boost backburn, turning around and firing in the opposite direction. This is meant to reduce its speed so that it doesn't keep flying over the Atlantic, but instead falls back toward Texas on a ballistic trajectory. Unlike flights 5, 7, and 8, however, the booster will not fly back to Boca Chica this time for a catch attempt by Mechazilla. Instead, it will make a controlled soft water landing in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a deliberate decision. The grid fins on V3 are 50% larger than on V2. But there are only 3 of them now instead of 4, and they're positioned differently on the booster. The control logic under real flight conditions still needs to be validated. Additionally, the engine design with the exposed rear, meaning without the heat shield that the V2 still had, is completely new. SpaceX wants to see how the booster behaves during the actual re-entry and landing profile before it comes into contact with the tower again. A water touchdown is not a step backwards here, but rather risk management. They don't want to unnecessarily put the infrastructure at risk. Ships and boosters are built within weeks or a few months. The launch facility can take many months or even years to become truly operational. Meanwhile, the ship keeps flying, suborbital meaning not a complete orbit around the Earth, but a high suborbital arc. The planned apogee is around 200 kilometers. Several demonstrations are planned during the flight. First, the pass dispenser will open. That's the door on the side of the ship through which Starlink satellites will exit in the future. It's not 100% confirmed whether there will be Starlink simulators on board for Flight 12. 8 such simulators were carried on previous flights. So far, SpaceX hasn't communicated anything about this for Flight 12. Secondly, there may possibly be an in-space relight. One of the central 3 engines will be briefly reignited in space. This is a critical technology for orbital maneuvering and refueling, for any mission that goes beyond a simple suborbital arc. There are indications that SpaceX might forgo it on Flight 12. Which would suggest that Flight 13 is already planned as an orbital test. Third, the re-entry. The ship turns, presents its heat shield to the atmosphere, and descends. The speed during re-entry is about 7 kilometers per second. Plasma temperatures during re-entry around the heat shield reach around 1,400 to 1,500 degrees Celsius. The heat shield of V3 has been significantly improved. The tiles are better secured. Some particularly vulnerable areas have been redesigned. That's the main takeaway of the entire flight. How does the new heat shield design hold up? The ship is then supposed to descend through the atmosphere, stabilize itself with the large flaps, perform a belly flop maneuver, right itself, and then make a controlled splashdown on its heat shield side in the Indian Ocean northwest of Australia. That was already demonstrated semi-successfully with version 2. It will be exciting to see how the ship survives with the new tile design, What are the realistic success criteria for Flight 12 first, and most importantly, the rocket leaves the pad? With a completely new vehicle and a completely new pad, that's already half the battle. If the stack lifts off cleanly and nothing dramatic happens in the first 30 seconds, the pad is saved. And that's worth its weight in gold. Second, clean stage separation. Hot staging is different in V3 compared to V2. If that works, one of the most important new architectural components is validated. Third, booster splashdown. If the booster survives control by the new grid fin architecture and re-entry with an exposed aft, an important hurdle has been cleared. A soft splashdown off the coast of Starbase in the Gulf of Mexico would then be the cherry on top. Whether that's asking too much, we'll see in a few days. Fourth, heat shield performance of the ship during re-entry. That's the favorite dataset of the SpaceX engineers. This is where we'll see whether V3 is really reusable. Fifth, optional but valuable PEZ dispenser. Possibly even Starlink simulators. Possibly also an in-space relight. Even if only the first 3 of these points work, Flight 12 is a success. If everything works, it's a triumph. By the way, we will put our Starship model on sale in the shop on the day of Flight 12. Printed on the Prusa-Core 1, about 60 cm tall and limited edition. And the SLS will be next in the shop. If you prefer to wear something from the Mars Chronicles universe, you can find our Ad Astra collection on Planet-Pioneers program. Embroidered caps, shirts, hoodies, EU-produced organic cotton. With code MARS26, you get 15% off everything. Link below. Now the outlook. What's next after Flight 12? If Flight 12 is successful, Flight 13 should follow in 4 to 6 weeks. Ideally, that means the beginning of June. A more realistic estimate is the end of June, because small events and flight delays almost always creep in. Weather, valves, engines, pad components, pressure sensors, and hundreds of other factors. It only takes one boat to accidentally enter the exclusion zone at the wrong time. For Flight 13, I'm expecting a booster catch by Mechazilla again. The ship would then repeat the profile of Flight 12, possibly expanded to include actual refueling. That would mean that Flight 13 consists of 2 launches. From today's perspective, that seems doubtful, because it's questionable whether enough boosters and ships will be ready by then. With Flight 14, the exciting question arises, will the ship also be caught? That would be a historic moment. A fully reusable stack on the same pad where it launched. But for that, the pads would have to be ready. And for that to happen on Flight 14, everything has to go according to plan on Flights 12 and 13. That's not completely out of the question, but it's not particularly likely either, since we're talking about a completely new system whose teething problems will take several flights to iron out. Here's a practical problem. Pad 2 is the launch pad we're currently using. Pad 1 is the older pad. It's currently being converted to the V3 standard. A booster catch on Pad 1 would destroy the entire construction site around it with engine exhaust. That's not possible. One option would be to have it finished by Flight 14, or at least made operational enough that it can catch a booster and place it on a transport stand. Another option is that Launch Complex 39A in Florida is ready by then so that it can catch boosters. But that's also optimistic because the tank farm there is only just being tested. Realistically, on Flight 14, either the booster or the ship will probably be caught. Not both at the same time. P6 will have to choose one of the 2 catches as long as the infrastructure isn't ready. While all this is happening, production continues. Ship 41 is already in the Star Factory, and ships 42 through 46 are in different stages of construction. Booster 20 is in preparation. The Gigabay in Boca Chica is nearing completion. It will be able to stack up to 24 vehicles at the same time. In Florida, the site is located. For transportation between Boca Chica and Florida, SpaceX has 2 ships. The previous transporter, Marmac 31, also internally called You'll Thank Me Later, can carry 1 vehicle at a time. In addition, there is now the former drone ship Just Read the Instructions, on which countless Falcon 9 boosters have landed. It has been repurposed as the Starship transporter and has enough deck space for several vehicles at the same time. The cadence roadmap for 2026 looks roughly like this if everything goes smoothly. Flight 12 in mid-May, Flight 13 in mid to late June, and Flight 14 at the end of July or early August. From then on, the launch frequency keeps escalating because more vehicles are available and more pads are coming online. A total of 5 pads will go into operation from which Starship can launch. 2 in Texas, 3 in Florida. When the Star Factory in Florida is finished, the output will double again. But that's probably not how it's going to go. There will be delays. But even a conservative estimate predicts more Starship launches in the second half of 2026 than in the entire first half of 2025 plus all of 2024 combined. There's a moment from the last SpaceX video that really stuck with me. Jacob McKenzie, the vice president Raptor, stands in front of a forest of Raptor engines and says that something is only impossible if it breaks the laws of physics. We're not breaking any laws of physics, we're just trying to use them as effectively as possible. That's the essence of the entire program. What will rise above the Gulf of Mexico in 2 weeks is not an incremental improvement. It's a vehicle that pushes physics further than ever before, putting over 100 tons into orbit reusably for the first time. With engines that deliver 22% more thrust while being significantly simpler in design. On a launch pad that can be made ready again just 13 days after each launch. By the way, that's still far from the actual goal of several launches per day. I will be live streaming on May 12th and 13th. As usual, there will also be warm-up events before the launch where we can get ready together. If you want to join, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. If you have questions about the flight that you want to see answered, write them in the comments. I read every single one. A big thank you goes to Pusa. Without her support, this channel would look completely different. My name is Serwin and this was Mars Chronicles. Thank you for tuning in. Spera ad. Astra. So, and now many